Okay, so I'm going to first show you the PowerPoint as originally submitted by the student using it was the literature review on the complementary and alternative medicine. So this is how the PowerPoint was originally submitted, and it's not a bad PowerPoint. But it's basically copied and pasted from the paper and does not make changes needed for the presentation medium, which is different from a paper. So let's go over some of this information. First of all, I want to say that this is not a narrated PowerPoint because this was presented in class. Of course, you will need to add narration to your PowerPoint. And that narration can be added in a couple of different ways. For my PowerPoint, I add audio by clicking on under the Insert tab, and this little drop down allows me to record. Some people have a slightly different version of PowerPoint, and you'll need to do a little investigation and see what works best or what your options are. All right. So let me go ahead and start presenting this from the beginning as a slideshow. So first of all, this student has transitions, has animations. I would take that off. It is somewhat distracting to have these animations. As you can see, you have to click through. So if we go back, this is the title slide, and it's a good title slide overall. It uses some visuals that are decorative, but they fall under the theme of this particular topic. They seem to match up. It's well laid out in the way it looks, with the primary focus on the words here. We've got the paper title. This is the title slide, and we also have the student name, the class, and the date. All right. So your second slide, you're going to have to play around with how you want to organize this. And I did not require a hook slide, but this student did do a hook slide, and I think it works really, really well. It brings the urgency for looking at this research to the forefront. So the student chose to pull a good quote about cancer and include, again, a visual that is not informative. This is purely ornamental, but it goes with that same theme. We've got sort of a blue theme going with a clean font, white background, so it looks pleasant. And note down here that the student includes the parenthetical reference, and you need to do that whenever you use quotes or paraphrases, just like you did in your paper. And what the student did was turn this parenthetical reference slightly smaller font, and pulled it down into the bottom of the page so it doesn't kind of lean in on that quote there. So this is a good hook slide. Again, not required, but I think it works really, really well. So you might want to consider including a hook slide. All right. So this is the background and definition slide, and this student put this before the thesis statement slide. I think that's great. I think for this presentation, that works well. Again, note this use of an image that works well with the theme of this presentation. One thing I would say about this slide is it's pretty wordy. Remember that you are presenting this information. So the words on the slides are there as reminders to the presenter and just sort of key words for the viewer. The primary information distribution is through the narration. So you must narrate every slide. you're going to talk about each slide. So those words on the slides should be there as a guideline for you and for the viewer, rather than all the words that you're going to read off the slide, because that never works well in a presentation. You don't want to read your presentation. All right. This is the thesis slide, and note that the student has the first part, the current trends in research. So this is that first part of your thesis statement. Researchers are currently studying X about X. And then this student bullets out the 3 categories. And those were the 3 concepts, the 3 themes that the literature review had information on, that the literature review addressed. All right, this is a good slide. It's very straightforward. It's easy to follow. All right, so next is the factors driving. We should get this next, and let's see. In fact, we do. Now, this slide has, I think, a good picture that actually does illustrate some of the information on this slide, but there's too much information, too many words. This is literally pulled from the paper and dropped down into this slide, and you do not want to do this. Note how big the font on the parenthetical references are. So too many words on this slide. This really does need to be dialed back with the words. There ought to be only short bulleted information, not all this information. Same for this. You can just look at this and say, wow, too much information, too many big blocks of paragraphs. This is very hard to consume when you're a viewer. So this needs to be reworked, this particular slide. I do like this graphic because it sort of pushes this idea of lack of knowledge with all these question marks without being obvious. So this figure was meant to illustrate the information on this slide, but there was no reference to this figure slide, and you need to reference it so that the viewer is expecting it. All right, so this looks pretty good though, good information. Now, I will say that anytime you include a graph or a chart or a figure or anything, you absolutely have to spend time talking about it. Otherwise, the viewer wonders, why did you include it? What was that for? It needs to be discussed, to be explained. So this is the third point. This was the third concept in the paper. And again, a little bit wordy, not as bad as the past 2 slides, but a little bit on the wordy side. And that could be dialed back a bit. And also that next slide is another graph slide, another figure slide that should be queued up on this slide. So you can see we've got this table here, but there's no reference here about it, and that should be fixed. Finally, this is the conclusion slide, and this looks great. I actually think this slide is fine. It doesn't need anything else. It works really well. And then the final slide is the reference slide, and this looks good too. This slide has a lot of good, it's organized well, all the information. You notice that we don't use there's no hanging indent, and that's because it's hard to do in PowerPoint. It's like next to impossible, so I'm not going to be looking for hanging indent, but basically you've got to include all the references from your paper on your reference slide. And so now I want to look at the revised PowerPoint of that same PowerPoint we just looked at. I did a revision of it to show you how much better it works when those issues that I brought up are fixed. So first of all, let's go ahead and put it in slideshow presentation mode. And you notice that I got rid of the animation so that everything is there all at once. And I think it just looks better and it works better. This slide is exactly the same. This slide was fine. I like this hook slide. Again, I encourage you to include a hook slide. You notice that I bolded. I took a lot of the words out, and I just kept what was crucial to talk about. I bolded this first statement about giving cancer patient treatment alternatives with the exclamation, and I dialed back some of the words on that initial definition background slide. This is exactly the same, this thesis slide. I thought it was a good thesis slide. You can see how much less this particular slide has. If you go back and compare them side by side, this really just hits the big points, and we keep somewhat of a parallel, the fear of, desire to, need to, so that you're hitting the big ideas without all the extra fluff that you do not need, because you are going to be presenting that information to the viewer. And you notice I took these parenthetical references down smaller. This is the most noticeable. I took the two big paragraphs and I split them into 4 very short bullets. And then I referenced the figure on the next slide. As you can see, I did the same thing with this. I dialed it back a bit with the words, and I referenced the table on the next slide. This one's the same. This is the same because it was good and good references. So this, let me get out of this. This presentation is not pulled straight from the paper. It's the same information, but I took that information and I made it appropriate for the medium of a presentation, which is very different from the medium of a paper. All right, so this, remember, you need to include narration, and you want to include some graphics to make it interesting. You want to think about a theme. Or you can look at this sidebar and just note how all of these slides seem to work well together with the color scheme, the font's the same, the background for all of the information slides, that's all white. We've got our references, which are gray, but that works really well because it sort of highlights that this is the reference slide. So I think it works well to have this gray text box. All right, any questions, go ahead and give me a call.